Welcome to Woodbury Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Carlson, and I'm here today with Rick Richardson of Southbury and his daughter, Julia Bauer Richardson. They are two people who are behind the initiative called Justice Southbury, which creates a public conversation about social justice locally as well as nationally. So welcome, Rick and Julia. Thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks for having us.
Sandy, thank you for doing this, and thank you for being the Poet Laureate of Woodbury. That's pretty cool.
Well, it's an honor. We live in a really dynamic and interesting community, and it's just fun. So Justice Southbury draws public attention in Southbury to current issues that represent continuing social injustice problems. Could you speak to us about what motivated you to start this conversation and what has motivated you to keep it going for so long?
So we are approaching this Sunday will be our 145th consecutive week of rallying at the corner of Main Street South and Main Street North in Southbury. We gathered there for the first time the Sunday following the murder of George Floyd, at the time to express our disappointment for what had happened, our determination for a brighter future. And it was just a group of us then, and so many people wanted to show their support and we're still fired up. And so we decided to hold another rally the next Sunday to allow for more of our local social justice advocates to join. And at that second rally, I gave my first ever speech, and it was the first time I urged our crowd to embrace a movement and not allow it to be a moment. And here we are 145 weeks later.
That first Sunday, a couple of other people had arranged it and sent some notice around. And I think that happened pretty much every small town and mid-sized city and large city in America the Sunday after George Floyd was murdered, that people got together to express outrage, dedicate themselves to improvement, and kind of say enough. And we just never stopped. Certainly there was no intention that first week to say, oh, let's just do this in perpetuity. But the thing that was most striking, we had almost 200 people that first week, and we don't take any credit for that. We didn't organize that. Again, we just attended. My wife and I and our three daughters attended, and we were sort of with a line of almost 200 people. We were near the end, and a man that I have not seen since that day, but is a Southbury resident, a Black man, was walking by everybody and with a video camera and just saying as he passed each person, thank you, thank you, thank you. And because we were at the very end, we could hear him as he finished saying thank you, then turn the camera around to himself and said, I never knew my community would do this. And it was so powerful. And it was powerful, and it was sad to think that it took this for a person to feel like my community can have good people who can be supportive. So I think we realized pretty quickly that there were a lot of people who wanted to express, to lean into these issues. And so we just started leaning in.
That first week as well, there was a woman holding a sign that said, if you ever wondered what you would have done during the civil rights movement, you're doing that now. And so I think that also was a big motivating factor for us. Like, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? We just realized we've got to keep it going.
I think it speaks volumes to how this is an ongoing, continuous, recursive situation that we face as a nation, as well as small towns in Connecticut, that we have to be ever vigilant about our rights and freedom, and what that looks like, that we're not just talking the talk, but it really does manifest itself as equity and equality for everybody in our community. So more power to you. It's amazing. And I'm going to say this, on a very cold, windy March night, I took my dogs out as quickly as I possibly could this evening. So when you said 145 consecutive weeks, I'm thinking of the extremes of heat and cold and like various forms of precipitation that have visited us over those weeks. What's that like when it's really, really, really awful out there? What keeps you going?
Julia embarrassed us that first summer by collapsing of heat stroke. Literally, we took her to the emergency room. But why? Because we were out there on a time when people would normally say, let's be in the air conditioning. The first winter, we had the lowest, the smallest attendance we've ever had was 8. We had 8 people. Why do we only have 8 people? It was February, we were literally in the middle of a blizzard. And it was one of those, don't go out, stay in. And by the time Julia went off to college the first fall, I said, well, now that we've done it, 20 straight weeks, let's keep it going, even if I'm the only person out there. But 7 other people joined me that day. So it's kind of a continuing thing. Our very first anniversary, we had 125 people. It was a 3-hour rally. We had speakers from around the state. We had gospel singers. It was amazing. And it rained, it poured.
Downpoured.
The entire time. And 125 people stayed out in the downpouring rain for this. That's why, Julia and I are the ones who are here, but there would be no Justice Southbury if it weren't for all the other people who come out consistently and say, how can we contribute? How can we help? People who speak at the rallies each week, people who bring, we stock the juice shelf at the Woodbury, at the Southbury Food Bank. And there are people who bring juices. Yeah. And so there are people who bring juices each week. So yeah, it's really, it's a credit to so many people.
Yeah. And I think that consistency too is such a key for us as well. And it's kind of become this, we joke about it sometimes, like our community has become this fellowship, and it's, it's like, it's every single Sunday that we gather together and we have speeches and we talk and we discuss, have dialogues about these really important issues. And it's, it's like our own church gathering or religious service gathering. It's our own type of that. And it's every single Sunday. So it kind of gives people that consistency to go and learn something new every Sunday.
That's amazing. We met personally through the United Methodist Church in Woodbury, which is a tradition that is founded on social justice and basically speaking truth to power from outside its walls and being seen as well as heard and doing good work. So it's tremendous to see it really happening. I'm curious about Playhouse Corner. That's a very busy intersection. It's really a gateway into Southbury off of 84. What's it like to occupy that space? What kind of reactions do you encounter? What's the vibe like there on a regular basis, or does it vary from week to week?
Part of the reason why we're there is because it probably is the busiest intersection in Southbury and kind of the only busy intersection in Southbury. So we get constant traffic and we're very visible. And at this point, we get people who pass us for the first time, but we also get people who kind of know that we're there and are anticipating that we're going to be there when they drive by. So we get very public responses. I mean, the majority of the responses are just kind of a drive-by, not interacting with us at all.
There are a lot of people who react very positively, honking their horns, giving a thumbs up, clapping, doing this heart thing. It's become more, from a percentage standpoint, it's become much more positive over time as I think people realize that we're not going away. And we're always gratified by that. I talk to people about how, you look and you see a car and there's 1 or 2 people in the car and they're just living their life and doing their thing, listening to music or doing, whatever things they're doing at the time. And they see our group and it lights them up. One of the signs, a trans flag, a pride flag, a Black Lives Matter flag, a love your neighbor sign, something about what we're doing gets them to be put in a different mood, in a better place, and in a way that makes us think, look, if that person can be inspired even a little bit, if all it means is that they're happy for 5 seconds and they get on the highway and they start cursing because someone cuts them off, all right, well, for 5 seconds they were happier than they would have been. But we also hear from people who have been inspired by that and feel like, wow, I didn't know that this thing existed. This is a good thing to see. And we've had a couple of situations where people have told us, families of color have told us, we moved to Southbury because of these rallies. As they're coming up from the city, coming up from somewhere else, thinking about where to move, and they've said, we looked at different towns, we saw we saw a rally the first time we were here. We saw a rally another time, and we said, this is a place for us. That's pretty cool. That feels really good. We had a woman about 2 months ago send me a private message on one of the social media messenger things saying, Justice Southbury is what makes me feel comfortable raising a biracial child in this town. So being on that corner, there is a lot of real positive interaction with the passing motorists. I think Julia is waiting for me to say, yeah, but Dad, what about the 5 or 10 people every week who, as they go by us, they rev their motors to put up this coal rolling or whatever it is with this black smoke in our faces. People throw garbage out the windows of their cars at us. Once in a while, we hear the N-word. We used to hear a lot of Trump 2020, like when I say Trump 2020, that it means I'm opposing everything you guys are doing. Like it was a stand-in for that. And every single week, come stand with me as I'm standing there with my sign that in red, white, and blue says, love your neighbor. And in this hand, I'm holding an American flag. That's all I'm doing, standing there like that. And I get flipped the bird many times each Sunday. And I want to kind of say, is it the flag? Is it the love your neighbor? Or is it just, that, the message is a little more subtle than that? So there are people who've been, and being at that corner, it hasn't happened for quite some time now, but at the beginning, we would get mad people showing up and yelling at us, and there were a lot of uneasy moments. We're wondering, we're kind of out here as sitting ducks. What could happen? The most memorable one to me was a guy who came up and started walking down the line and shouting at everybody, right up in their face, everybody, all lives matter, all lives matter. And now what we do when a passing motorist yells out at us, all lives matter, we just cheerily yell back equally. They don't like that. They don't like that so much. But this guy was going, he was just bound and determined to make his point to everybody, all lives matter, all lives matter. So I kind of feel responsible for the group. So I approached him and got up in his face and I yelled all lives matter at him. And he yelled all lives matter. And I said, white lives matter. And he said, white lives matter. And I said, blue lives matter. And he said, blue lives matter. And I said, black lives matter. And he said, all lives matter. Wow. I said, see, you can't even say it, so you don't mean it. So it's been an interesting spot.
I guess it's never been said that engaging in civil discourse would be easier without its challenges. And I think it's really hugely to your credit that those folks with those unaccepting mindsets do feel challenged and do feel threatened by people who are accepting. I think on a national scale, there was a little bit too much comfort with being exclusionary and saying things that were taboo once before, and challenging that kind of thinking is really, really vital. And I think that challenging that kind of thinking is something that Justice Southbury accomplished when the Nazi nonsense reared its head again earlier this year. Could you speak a little bit about how Southbury said no to the Nazis a second time?
I assume that most of your listeners would know that Southbury literally said no to the literal Nazis back in the late 1930s. But in November of 2022, there were 2 incidences of white nationalist hate literature put in mailboxes on a street in Southbury, and a sticker put up in a porta potty at one of the parks. Those were both brought to our attention, and that's one of the main objectives for Justice Southbury is we call our social justice bat signal. If somebody in town is aware, a person or a group is aware of something that is hateful that's done or that's discriminatory that's done, tell anybody you want, but if you want to tell us, we'll be your allies. So they told us the net results were this got substantial publicity in the statewide TV stations. It was suggested to us that we report to the Department of Justice and the FBI, which we did. We've spoken to them, and they are going to work with us in collaboration with us to hold a town-wide session probably this summer called United Against Hate, where the FBI and Department of Justice put on a presentation to say, what do you do when you're faced with hate materials? And to their credit, the Board of Selectmen in town issued a unanimous statement condemning the hate literature. Now, some of that would have been done without us, because without us, someone still would have reported, and maybe this would have been done. But certainly we provide a mouthpiece. And Sandy, since your podcast is about writing and communication and the importance of words and language, that's something that we've really learned. That if you stand up and advocate in the right way, you can be passionate, you can be persistent, and as long as you're not a jerk about it, you can really accomplish something. I'm sorry for monopolizing this part, and Julie, step in a sec, but I wanted to just go back to something you were saying before about in terms of the dealing with people and dealing with opponents. We get a lot of experience on this now through social media, and we've realized that when we're dealing with opponents who, every week I send out a notice of what this week's rally is. So, for instance, this coming week is the second week of Women's History Month. So we're going to have someone speaking about this topic and about that topic. And inevitably, and I do it on like literally 20 different local Facebook groups, like in Southbury, Newtown, Woodbury. And there are a couple where they're mostly naysayers, and some of these naysayers say nay every week and like to put potshots out. And I try to engage with them, not because I think I'm going to change their minds. If there's people, there's plenty of people who support what we do. There's plenty of people who don't like what we do, but there's also people who are just curious. You guys, you say Black Lives Matter, and we do that because it's easier to say Black Lives Matter than to say all lives can't truly matter until Black lives and white lives matter equally. But there's a lot of people who feel like, well, I'm not really sure what you guys are up to. I don't like the hate stuff over there, but I'm not quite sure what you guys really stand for. So we're trying to be very aware of when we engage. If I'm engaging with someone who's all about hate, I'm trying to engage from the standpoint of being all about love, so that people in the middle, I'm happy to have that values conversation. And if the people in the middle say, you know what, I'm listening to this guy, I'm listening to that person, and you know what, I am more attracted to the love side, then we're using our words to do something beneficial for the community.
Right. And I think what I'm hearing you say too, Rick, is that you don't have to buy into something wholesale or to imprint every last aspect of the movement onto yourself to be a part of it. And that is also the message of acceptance. We all have a perspective that we're bringing to the conversation. And if you're buying the most of it and it's speaking to those values, then why not, right? That's so encouraging, because it's really breaks or chips away at what we've lived with for a good few years now, where you're for us or you're against us, and there's no in between. And that isn't life.
And I think that the power of words is what we realized our second year, once we established ourselves on the corner, and we were, trying to figure out next steps. We worked with a group of graduate students at the New School in New York City for their organizational change management program. And they consulted with Justice Southbury and helped us come up with a mission and a vision and a committee structure and objectives, tangible next steps. And my dad and I were joking before this podcast, while we were, discussing what we want to make sure we bring up, that we were thinking back to the conversation that we had, what was it, Dad, like an hour and a half, something like that, where we were just trying to come up with 2 sentences, one mission, one vision, to somehow sum up what we were doing and what we wanted to achieve. And even still, after that hour and a half session, we came in to the bigger group with the graduate students, and we came out with an entirely two different mission and vision statements, and realized the importance of making things concise and to the point. And that's when we came up with our mission, which is to cultivate an inclusive community where all are treated fairly and welcomed as equals. And our vision is a more fair and kind community for all. And it's right to the point, exactly sums up what Justice Southbury is doing, what we want to do. And it really was a great lesson in when you have an organization like this with a lot of different people and a lot of different personal objectives and opinions and beliefs and values coming to the table, how do you take all of that and all of the passion and all the aspirations there and put them into short and sweet little sentences to keep our momentum going. So it was a really great lesson in the power of language and the power of sometimes less is more, and that was what we noticed here.
That's pretty amazing. So you are a movement, not a moment for sure. Is there infrastructure? I hear you have social media, that you use social media platforms. But how do people find you if they have a concern, or how do you join this movement?
Some people stop by rallies. Many weeks, including this past Sunday, people will stop by and say, "What you guys are about? I've seen you here before, or the first time I've seen you. What can you tell me?" So we have an email list. So I've got 215 people on an email list. So if we're emailing a notice to something, that we send that out to them. We have a closed Facebook group. Is that how you say it, Julia? A closed Facebook group where the idea is that, if we were a bridge club, we wouldn't want people in saying bridge is stupid. I don't like bridge. So someone says, I'd like to join the Facebook group, and Julia or I will find that out, and we'll take a look at the person and see what their profile is. And if I can't tell from if on their Facebook page they are supporting for their birthday, they're raising money for the Cancer Society. They have nice pictures of their kids. They seem kind and fair and pleasant. We usually let that person in. And if someone has mostly pictures of themselves flipping the bird in a selfie, we're probably not letting that person in. But there's also plenty of people where I'll send them a message and say, "Hey, I see that you want to join the Justice Southbury Facebook group. Tell me about your interest." So there's over 700 members in that group, but it's again a closed group. But there's also a Justice Southbury page. Am I correct about that, Julia?
Yeah, public Facebook page.
That is public, and so we post every week. We post the speeches that were given at the rally, and the speeches are from. I'll speak, Julia will speak, but we also have a lot of speakers from around the state. We had a full slate of people speaking during Black History Month last month. We've got some amazing speakers this month for Women's History Month. We've had Pride Month rallies. We've had Stop Asian Hate rallies. We had a series where last fall where we had clergy from various faith traditions speak about what does love your neighbor mean.
We've had veterans, we've had police officer, and not just from around the state, but we've had people from out of state as well.
Yeah, because another thing we do, Sandy, that people who read the Voices newspaper will have seen this, and I think sometimes it's in the Woodbury paper and the Danbury paper as well. Every month or so, we have what we call the speaker series, Justice Southbury Speaker Series, where we have Zoom conversations on a Sunday night. And typically when we do that, many of our speakers have been from out of state. We had a couple of speakers from Atlanta during Black History Month. So the idea then is that we can attract a different crowd, because people, instead of having to get up and come to our cold rallies or hot rallies or wet, rainy rallies, people from the comfort of their own bedroom can listen and exchange ideas and learn. So there's lots of different ways that people can find out about us, lots of ways that people can get involved.
That's terrific. And I think Zoom is a tremendous blessing for people who may be mobility challenged, maybe too young to drive. It's a wonderful resource for sharing ideas and for connecting people. What would your advice be for anybody listening to this podcast and sort of eager to support social justice, but maybe they're not within easy reach of Southbury? What would you advise them to do to kind of have their idea grow legs and take form?
It's important anywhere, and for anyone to start by educating yourself, so you can educate those around you. One of my favorite authors, Beverly Tatum, has a book called "Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?" And in that, she describes these spheres of influence that we all have, that the words we share all have certain influence on the people in our life. And the influence varies based on the nature of our relationships. It can be an employer having influence over their employees. It can be me having influence over my best friend because she values what I say. And so this author, Dr. Tatum, She discusses the importance of engaging in dialogue within our spheres of influence. So within the people that we know and can really have effective dialogue. And this really can lead to that action. But the first sphere of influence that we have that she talks about is, and our strongest influence is our own selves. We really hold the power to be lifelong learners, but we have to actively seek this out. We have to actively seek out resources to expand our minds to different perspectives. You have to take that active role. And so educating yourself and starting with acknowledging your own judgments and assumptions is a really, really helpful tool in communicating, and then it can lead to communicating effectively and respectfully, first with people like close family and friends, and then with coworkers and peers, and then with community members. And then you can expand that community even across differences. And I've found through this work and through some of the work I do at school, that if you really listen to others, like actively listen and genuinely affirm them, which you can still genuinely affirm something that someone did or said, even if you disagree, because you can affirm something like a value or an emotion of theirs, maybe rather than the content of their words. So you can still genuinely affirm another person and approach from a place of respect. When you approach from that place of love, which is what Justice Southbury does, we approach from a place of love and respect, then you start to see that people will do that around you. And so these spheres of influence that Tatum talks about, it makes me think of the environmental activism phrase, think globally, act locally. And so that's a lot of what Justice Southbury does, is taking these broad issues that are often, don't seem very tangible, and taking it to our local community and working with these spheres of influence that we have. It really does just take someone to start the conversation. And then you'll see that, that's what happened here. And our community just followed along. And I think it's very easy for us to get into this mentality that someone else will do it and that things will get done and it'll change, things will change. But this is the same mentality that leads to low voter turnout. This perspective that we're just one small voice in this vast population. Our actions don't matter. Our words don't matter in the greater scheme of things. But, when one small voice comes out and then a couple small voices join, and then it's a bit of a stronger cry, and then it turns into a shout. And, before you know it, you've got a movement on your hands. And that's what happened here. And so I encourage people to just take that active role and start with themselves, start with yourselves, educate yourself, acknowledge your judgments and assumptions with your spheres of influence, see who you can talk to, and just start these conversations, get more people thinking about these things, and then be that person to get things going and to start and just say something, and people will follow.
One of the things we've really learned is that one person can make a difference, because if it weren't for Julia, there wouldn't be a Justice Southbury. In a couple of ways. I mean, that first, again, we didn't run the first rally, but after Julia posted some pictures on Instagram and her friend said, "Oh my gosh, that looks amazing. Are you going to do it again?" And Julia said to me, "Dad, are they going to do it again?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, let me call them." And the people who did the first one said, "No, we don't really have the time, no thanks, but you want our signs, you can go do one." So Julia said, "Dad, can we do it?" And we did it. And there were a little under 200 people the first week. We then promoted it and got 250 people the second week, thinking that was it. We wanted to do a rally. We did a rally. And one of our favorite moments was about an hour or so into that second rally, an older couple, and when I say older, I mean older than 90, were walking away from the rally with one of the signs that we hadn't made, that I needed to give back to the people who had done it. And Julia looked at me and said, Dad, they're taking the signs. What do we do? And so I said, well, let's just go over there. They probably don't realize it. So we walked over, and Julia said, "Oh, would you like me to take the sign back for you? Would you like me to help you and bring the sign back over to the box?" And they looked and they said, "No, we'll just bring them back next week." And Julia looked at me like, "Dad, is there going to be a next week?" And we said, "Well, I guess now there has to be."
Oh, wow.
And really then, it was, the next week, a guy showed up with an angry guy showed up. Are you here again? Third week in a row, with a big American flag, walking back and forth, like to show that's America. Angry at you is America, as opposed to we're out here talking about loving people and what does it mean to try to be fair to people and kind to people. And Julia wrote a speech about taking back the flag and talking about how true patriotism throughout American history doesn't lie in saying, America, love it or leave it, but in saying, in order to form a more perfect union, the better angels of our nature, that the best of America has always been saying, not, oh, we're good enough, we're fine, but in saying we can be better. One person really can make a difference. And we've been really inspired by the words of Martin Luther King Jr., a lot of his quotes. One of the quotes that really has pushed us is when he said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Yeah. And we really said, you can't be silent. You can't be silent.
Well, when Julia spoke and then you, Rick, I just had chills. Oh my goodness. And Julia, I hope you share this podcast with every English teacher you've ever had. Just give them that happy moment. I mean, you spoke so eloquently about the power of Beverly Tatum's book and this idea that if we just look inside ourselves and first be able to articulate our own vision of what healthy citizenship is, all those facets that you guys have discussed, then we become part of that movement. We don't have to be a part of a specific group or organization or bureaucracy. We become the change. We become that agent for change, and people who want the same thing will find us. And I think there is a really interesting symbiosis there. And having driven by Justice Southbury and also Justice Woodbury and seeing these people and honking my horn and saying, wait, I know those people. And sometimes I'm surprised by who's there, and I'm just encouraged to see that this sort of broader vision of a kinder community is taking hold in places I wouldn't think about otherwise if I hadn't seen them standing there. And it does take courage to do that, and I think that's really, really laudable. I feel so inspired and so encouraged by the work that you both are doing, and this sort of masterclass in how to form a vision statement and a mission statement and communicate with people in a very short amount of time while others may be running interference behind you. It's really, really profound. There's just so much information and so much to learn from this conversation. I know I'll be playing it multiple times as I look inside myself and see how I can also share that vision of a kinder community. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Sandy.
Really appreciate the opportunity.